The journey had been exhausting, a seemingly endless drive down a dark and desolate highway with nothing but the dim glow of my car's headlights piercing the black void ahead, and by the time the clock ticked past 2 a.m., I knew I couldn't go on much longer without stopping. My eyelids were heavy, my body aching, and every passing mile felt like a test of my endurance. When the glowing sign of Hotel Bellevue appeared in the distance, it felt almost too good to be true, a small, unassuming motel tucked away at the side of the highway, promising a brief respite from the loneliness and fatigue of the road. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for my car and a single dusty pickup truck, and as I stepped out, the air felt unnervingly still, as though the world around me was holding its breath. Inside, the atmosphere wasn't much different. The reception area was dimly lit, furnished with old wooden chairs and a desk that had clearly seen better days, and behind it sat a man, middle-aged with thinning hair and round glasses, his name badge reading Thomas in faint, faded letters. He barely looked up when I approached, his voice flat and devoid of any real emotion as he said, "Welcome. We only have one room available tonight, the second floor, down the hall. I hope it suits you." I nodded, grateful for the opportunity to rest, though something about the man's detached demeanor unsettled me, and as I handed over my credit card and signed the register, I couldn't help but glance around the empty lobby, noticing the peeling wallpaper and the faint, musty smell of old wood that lingered in the air. "Is it always this quiet?" I asked, trying to break the awkward silence. Thomas looked at me then, his eyes almost devoid of any spark of life, and replied with a thin, humorless smile, "At this hour, yes. Most travelers don't stop by." The key he handed me was attached to a heavy brass tag marked 210, and I made my way up the creaky staircase. The worn carpet beneath my feet muffled the sound of my steps, while the dimly lit hallway greeted me with its eerie stillness, decorated with faded paintings of pastoral landscapes that seemed oddly out of place. When I entered room 210, I was relieved to find it surprisingly clean, small but functional, with a bed, a simple wooden desk, and a bathroom tucked into the corner. After a quick shower, I collapsed onto the bed, letting the silence envelop me as I closed my eyes and tried to shake the feeling that something about this place wasn't quite right. Just as I was beginning to drift off, a faint sound jolted me awake, a light knock on the door, barely audible but distinct enough to send a chill down my spine. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice sounding sharper than I intended. There was no response, and when I got up to check through the peephole, the hallway outside was empty, bathed in the dim glow of a single flickering light bulb. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the wind, perhaps, or the building settling, but as I returned to bed, I couldn't shake the unease that had taken hold of me, and it wasn't long before I heard it again. A soft, deliberate tapping, this time followed by the faint sound of footsteps echoing down the hall. My heart was pounding as I opened the door again, peering out into the hallway, but there was nothing, no one, just the oppressive silence pressing in from all sides. It was then that I noticed a folded piece of paper lying on the floor just outside my door, its edges slightly crumpled as though it had been handled hastily. The message scrawled on it was short and chilling, "You're not alone." Every instinct told me to pack up and leave, but exhaustion and a stubborn desire to believe it was all some kind of prank kept me rooted in place. I took the note to the front desk, where Thomas was still sitting, his expression as blank and indifferent as before. "Someone left this outside my room," I said, holding up the note. "Is this some kind of joke?" Thomas barely glanced at it before shrugging and saying, "Probably just some kids messing around. Don't worry about it. Your room's secure." His lack of concern was infuriating, but there was something in his tone that made me hesitate, something that suggested he wasn't telling me everything. Reluctantly, I returned to my room, locking the door behind me and double-checking the windows, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. But the night was far from over. Around 3:30 a.m., I was jolted awake once more, this time by the unmistakable sound of something rustling inside the room. At first, I thought it was the wind, but when I turned on the light, my eyes were drawn to the closet door, which was now slightly ajar despite the fact that I was certain I had closed it earlier. I approached it cautiously, every nerve in my body screaming at me to stop, but when I pulled the door open, it was empty, just a small, dusty space filled with nothing but shadows. It wasn't until I turned back around that I saw it, another note, this time stuck to the bathroom mirror, written in the same frantic handwriting, "Leave now, before it's too late." Panic took over, and I grabbed my bag, determined to get out of there, but as I stepped into the hallway, I froze. The lights were flickering wildly, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint sound of something, or someone, whispering, though the words were too faint to make out. By the time I reached the lobby, Thomas was nowhere to be seen, the front desk abandoned and the main doors locked tight. I pounded on the glass, shouting for help, but the only response was the echo of my own voice bouncing back at me. Desperation drove me back to my car, and as I fumbled with the keys, I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I glanced back at the building, and for a brief, horrifying moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in one of the upstairs windows, silhouetted against the faint glow of the room's light. I didn't wait to find out if it was real. The engine roared to life, and I sped away, my hands trembling on the wheel as the dark highway swallowed me once more. It wasn't until days later, when I recounted the story to a friend, that I learned the truth about Hotel Bellevue. "That place," he said, his face pale. "It's been abandoned for years. They shut it down after people started disappearing." The trip to the coast was supposed to be a short, peaceful escape, a brief respite from months of work and stress that had worn both me and my sister, Anissa, thin. We arrived at the hotel, a modest, slightly outdated building tucked away in a grove of tall trees, late in the afternoon. Its charm lay in its simplicity, with its wooden exterior and large, welcoming windows overlooking the surrounding greenery. Everything seemed ordinary at first glance, but it didn't take long for an unsettling undercurrent to creep in, as if the building itself was trying to warn us of something. When we stepped into the lobby, the first thing I noticed wasn't the aged chandelier or the creak of the wooden floorboards under our suitcases. It was a man. He was seated on one of the leather armchairs near the entrance, half hidden behind an open newspaper. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes weren't. They were sharp, cold, and unrelentingly fixed on us, following our every movement as though he were memorizing every detail about us. His hair was graying at the temples, his suit crisply pressed, and his expression unreadable, but the weight of his gaze sent shivers down my spine. "Maybe he's just bored," Anissa whispered when I pointed him out, her voice lighthearted but her eyes betraying a flicker of unease. "Forget about him, let's check in and relax." The receptionist, a young man named Marcus, greeted us warmly and handed us the key to our room on the third floor. As we walked down the dimly lit hallway to our room, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, even though the corridor was empty and silent save for the muffled hum of distant chatter from the lobby. Our room was cozy, with a large window that offered a stunning view of the sea. The sound of waves crashing against the shore and the salty breeze streaming in through the slightly open window provided a momentary sense of peace. I pushed the man's unsettling stare to the back of my mind, convincing myself that it was just paranoia. The first night passed uneventfully, but the next morning, as we headed down to breakfast in the small dining area, I saw him again. He was seated at a table in the far corner, sipping coffee and pretending to read a book. His eyes, however, kept darting toward us. I nudged Anissa and whispered, "That's him. The man from the lobby yesterday." She glanced over briefly and shrugged, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "He's harmless, probably just a lonely traveler. Don't let it ruin your day." But something about him didn't feel harmless. There was a cold intensity in the way he observed us, as if he were waiting for something. Later that day, we decided to check out the hotel's pool. The area was nearly empty, save for a few guests lounging on chairs, and for a while, we managed to relax and enjoy the cool water. But then I saw him again. He was sitting on one of the lounge chairs near the pool's edge, wearing the same suit he'd worn in the lobby. A book rested in his hands, but he wasn't reading it, he was watching us. "Anissa," I whispered, gesturing subtly toward him, "he's here again." She turned her head slightly and sighed. "Okay, now it's getting weird. If we see him again, maybe we should say something to the staff." That evening, we decided to explore the nearby market. The narrow, bustling streets were filled with the scent of grilled seafood, the chatter of vendors, and the occasional burst of laughter from locals. For a while, I managed to forget about the man and immerse myself in the vibrant energy around us. But as we walked past a row of souvenir stalls, I felt it again, that prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. I turned, and there he was. Standing a few stalls away, his hands in his pockets, he stared at us, unblinking. "Okay, this is definitely not normal," I said, grabbing Anissa's arm. "We need to leave." She nodded, her face pale, and we hurried back to the hotel, our earlier excitement completely extinguished. That night, we double-checked the locks on the door and drew the curtains tightly. I tried to reassure myself that he couldn't possibly get into our room, but the unease was suffocating. Around midnight, just as I was starting to drift off, a faint noise pulled me back to full alertness. I held my breath and listened. The sound grew louder, closer, and then there was a soft knock on the door, followed by a man's voice, low and steady. "Housekeeping. Do you need anything?" The clock on the nightstand read 12:15 a.m. Housekeeping didn't come at this hour. I got up quietly and approached the door, my heart pounding. "We don't need anything. Please come back in the morning," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. There was silence for a moment, and then the doorknob rattled. I froze. "Who is it?" I demanded, my voice louder now. There was no response, but through the peephole, I saw him, the man in the suit, now wearing a white housekeeping uniform, his face expressionless but his eyes brimming with a chilling determination. My hands shook as I leaned against the door, trying to hold it shut. "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police," I shouted. The rattling stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, and then I heard hurried footsteps retreating down the hall. I waited several minutes before daring to look through the peephole again. He was gone. Anissa was wide awake now, clutching her phone. What the hell just happened? Who was that? "I don't know," I whispered, still shaking. "But we need to tell the front desk." Marcus, the receptionist, listened intently as we recounted the night's events. His expression grew darker with each detail. "We don't have any housekeepers working at night," he said firmly. "And from what you've described, it doesn't sound like any of our staff. I'll check the security cameras, but I'd suggest you check out tomorrow, just to be safe." The next morning, as we packed our bags, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, even though the hallway outside our room was empty and the hotel seemed eerily quiet. Before we left, I asked Marcus, "Do you think he'll come back?" He hesitated, then said, "Years ago, we had a staff member, a man who worked as a porter, who was let go after several complaints from female guests. He was never violent, but he made people uncomfortable. Maybe it's him, maybe it's not, but either way, I'd stay alert." We drove away from the hotel in silence, the shadow of the man's piercing gaze lingering in my mind. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, he's still watching, waiting for his next opportunity. The road stretched endlessly before me, a ribbon of asphalt winding through the dark, desolate landscape. The clock on my dashboard blinked 10:03 p.m., the glowing digits a stark reminder of how late it was. Fatigue weighed heavily on my eyelids, and the thought of finding a place to rest became more urgent with every passing mile. The night was unnervingly silent, the only sound the soft hum of my car's engine. Then I saw it, a faint flicker of light on the horizon. As I drew closer, the glow revealed itself to be the worn-out neon sign of a small roadside hotel. The letters spelled out Hotel Serena, though parts of the sign had gone dark, leaving some of the words incomplete. It didn't look like much, but I wasn't in a position to be picky. I pulled into the empty parking lot, my tires crunching softly against the gravel, and stepped out into the chilly night air. The lobby was small and dimly lit, the air carrying a faint musty odor that hinted at years of neglect. Behind the reception desk sat a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and tired eyes. He looked up as I entered, his face briefly registering surprise, as if guests were a rare occurrence. "Do you have a room for the night?" I asked, my voice cutting through the stillness. He hesitated for a moment before nodding. "We do. $70. Cash only." The man handed me an old-fashioned brass key with the number 21 engraved on it. The key felt cold and heavy in my palm, and as I climbed the creaking staircase to the second floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The hallway was eerily quiet, the dim wall sconces casting long shadows that danced as I walked. My room was at the far end of the corridor. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, immediately struck by the room's peculiar chill. The decor was outdated, the wallpaper faded, and the furniture worn. I told myself it didn't matter, I just needed a few hours of sleep. After a quick shower, I placed my most valuable possession, a gold watch gifted to me by my late father, on the bedside table. The weight of the watch always gave me comfort, a tangible reminder of him. I lay down, the fatigue pulling me into a deep but uneasy sleep. A sound jolted me awake in the middle of the night. It was faint at first, like the soft creak of footsteps on the wooden floor. My heart raced as I strained to listen, but the silence that followed was deafening. Perhaps it was nothing, a trick of my tired mind. I rolled over, pulling the blanket tighter around me, but then I saw it, a shadow moving behind the thin curtains near the window. I sat up abruptly and turned on the bedside lamp. The room was empty. Every corner was just as it had been when I fell asleep. But when I reached for my watch, my stomach dropped, it was gone. Frantically, I searched the room, my hands trembling as I checked every drawer, every corner, even the bathroom. But it was nowhere to be found. Someone had been here. Someone had entered my room while I slept. I stormed downstairs to the reception desk, my mind racing with anger and fear. The receptionist looked up, his expression calm yet unreadable. "Someone broke into my room," I said, my voice tight. "They stole my watch." I saw a shadow, maybe it was a woman. Long dark hair, black dress. "Do you have security cameras?" His face paled at my description, and for a moment, he didn't speak. Finally, he said, "There are no cameras here. And, the person you described, she couldn't have been here." "Why not?" I demanded, my frustration growing. He hesitated, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Because that sounds like a guest who stayed here months ago. She died in an accident. Right here in this hotel." His words hung in the air like a cold mist. My chest tightened as I tried to process what he was saying. "That's impossible," I said firmly. "I saw her. She was real." The man simply shook his head. His eyes filled with an unsettling mix of fear and pity. I couldn't stay there another moment. I went back to my room, gathered my things, and left before dawn. But as I drove away, unease gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the image of that shadow behind the curtain, or the receptionist's haunted expression. The next morning, I reported the incident to the local authorities. They listened patiently as I described the events, including the receptionist's claim about the woman who had died. But when I mentioned the hotel's name, their expressions shifted. "Hotel Serena," one of the officers said, exchanging a glance with his colleague. "That place burned down months ago. Total loss. It's been abandoned ever since." My blood ran cold. "That's not possible," I stammered. "I was just there last night. I stayed in room 21. The officers exchanged another look before one of them spoke. "Are you sure?" "Because we investigated the fire ourselves. There hasn't been anyone there since." I insisted they take me back to the site. When we arrived, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The building was nothing but a charred skeleton, its walls blackened and crumbling. The parking lot was overgrown with weeds, and the old neon sign lay shattered on the ground. But in my pocket, I still had the key to room 21. It was as cold and heavy as when the receptionist had handed it to me. I stood there, staring at the ruins, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I had experienced. Every detail of the night was vivid in my mind: the receptionist, the dim hallway, the creak of the stairs, the chill of the room. None of it made sense. And then there was the watch. My father's watch was gone, stolen by a woman who, according to the receptionist, should not have existed. But if the hotel wasn't there, if it hadn't been operational for months, then where had I been? I still don't have answers. All I know is that I left something behind that night, something more than just my watch. To this day, I avoid roadside hotels. And when I drive through the night, I can't help but glance at the horizon, half expecting to see the faint glow of a neon sign calling me back to the shadows of a place that shouldn't exist.